Hello, fellow miners. Welcome to the final part of this week's lecture. And the final part is explanation. Okay, here we go. So, we've reached the final part, which means, let's just go back to our rubric, that of our three goals, to present a point, to prove the point, to make it plain why the point matters, we are on the element that combines 2 and 3. That means that in our peel, we are, strictly speaking, on our second E. We are explaining how and why our evidence supports our point. Let's remember our sample paragraph so far. Robert Herrick starts the poem by sexualizing Julia, saying, "When as in silks my Julia goes, then methinks how sweetly flows that liquefaction of her clothes." Herrick is not only equating his Julia with those corporeal attributes that most attract him, and we remember that corporeal means bodily, saying, "How sweetly flows that liquefaction of her clothes," but he is also suggesting the way in which this version of Julia is engendered by his own mind. Then, methinks, how sweetly flows that liquefaction. We have our point, we have our evidence, carefully picked out and given in sufficient context. But evidence on its own is not enough. Okay? Herrick is not only equating his Julia with those corporeal attributes that most attract him, saying, "How sweetly flows that liquefaction of her clothes," because your reader knows nothing, because they are utterly ignorant, they can't see where the evidence connects to the assertions. You must tell them. So in addition to evidence, you must explain the connection between the evidence and the assertion. Robert Herrick starts the poem by sexualizing Julia, etc. Herrick is not only equating his Julia with those corporeal attributes that most attract him, saying, "How sweetly flows that liquefaction of her clothes," but he is also suggesting the way in which this version of Julia is engendered by his own mind. Then, methinks, how sweetly flows that liquefaction. His Julia is just her body, the sweet flowing of clothes, and he creates the allure of that body in his thoughts. He thinks how sweet the flow is. You can see that the explanation lays bare how the evidence supports the assertion. Bam! It's this final sentence, which doesn't need to be the final sentence of the paragraph, that really proves the point. You can't do without evidence, but the evidence must come with an explanation of how the evidence proves the point. Now, it doesn't always have to be so obvious. So here is a slightly more elegant revision of our paragraph. Robert Herrick starts the poem by sexualizing Julia. "When as in silks my Julia goes, then methinks how sweetly flows that liquefaction of her clothes." Herrick equates, his Julia, got lost in my own paragraph. Herrick equates his Julia with those corporeal attributes that most attract him, the sweet flowing of her clothes, and makes it plain that this sweetness is a product of his own mind. After all, he thinks the liquidity of her clothing is sweet. Herrick's Julia is just her body, and it is entirely because of him that that body is erotic. Exactly the same construction, exactly the same elements, same result, just a sleeker expression. This is the power of revision. Each body paragraph should also anticipate and answer the question, so what? That is, why are you telling your readers this? What point does it make? In some paragraphs, the answer is going to be obvious, but in some, it won't. In the paragraph above, for example, you'll notice that although you've proven your point, you haven't told us why we should care about that point in the first place. Okay? Herrick's Julia is just her body, and it is entirely because of him that that body is erotic. Absolutely true. But so what? Why should I care about that? You need a sentence that tells the readers why they should care. So we have now moved on to the third of our goals. We're firmly in there to make it plain why the point matters. Point, evidence, explanation, and now this is the first part of our link. Link your point to your thesis. Just takes one sentence, okay? Herrick's Julia is just her body, and it is entirely because of him that that body is erotic. Thus, Julia is entirely a product of male fantasy. Bang! That's why it matters. It matters because everything that you have just asserted, given evidence for, and explained leads to the larger point that Julia is entirely a product of male sexual fantasy, which, if we had the first introductory paragraph of this imaginary essay, would be the thesis of the imaginary essay. Not every paragraph needs a so what sentence. Sometimes it's clear why you're making the point you are. But sometimes it's not clear how your point relates to your thesis or to your larger argument. And when that happens, you need to point out how it does so. So you need to check to be sure that your paragraph is making it plain what its larger purpose is serving, what your point is doing. You might say, what is the point of your point? In addition, as an essay gets longer, it becomes less and less easy for a reader to remember how your individual points relate to the thesis, which was way back at the beginning. It helps to remind your reader where it's all going or where it's all come from every few paragraphs. They'll thank you. Generally speaking, in writing, it helps to think that your reader doesn't have a very long memory, okay? Because they're so focused on what's happening in an individual paragraph that they lose sight of what's happening in the essay as a whole. So when that happens, or when it seems that you're risking that happening, it helps to remind them with a so what sentence where it's all going or where it's all come from. This leaves us with the final Peel element, which is use this sentence to link to the next paragraph, which you do not have to do, but you can. You may know this as a transition sentence, a linking sentence, or a transition sentence. So your final sentence can actually do double duty. Thus, Julia is entirely a product of male sexual fantasy, a fact that becomes more apparent in the next stanza. And then your next paragraph is going to go on and talk about the next stanza, a nice, simple transition. But you can also put transition sentences at the start of the next paragraph, which I actually did not know until I was well into my postgraduate education. And it looks slightly sleeker, so I prefer it. So you say, Herrick's Julia is just her body, and it is entirely because of him that that body is erotic. Thus, Julia is entirely a product of male sexual fantasy. In fact, this becomes even more obvious in the next stanza. And then you're off to your next paragraph. Yes, I did a little on-the-spot revision because that repetition of fact was unsightly, and we don't want that. So you don't have to put your transition sentence at the end, or your transition phrase at the end of the paragraph. You can also put it at the beginning of the next paragraph. New topic, new paragraph. So what does that mean? That means wherever you put your transition sentence, at the end of paragraph A, or at the beginning of paragraph B, where you're going to discuss the new topic, wherever you put your transition sentence, remember, new topic, new paragraph. when you begin discussing your new topic in full and with zeal, start a new paragraph to do that. Now, why does that matter? I realize it seems obvious, but the reason why it matters is because new facet, new paragraph. Now, what that means is it's not just when you go on to some new topic, when you're like, I'm talking about cats, and now I'm going to talk about dogs. New topic, new paragraph. But if you say, now I'm going to talk about cats' paws, now I'm going to talk about cats' noses, you have moved on to a new topic, even though it's a new facet. And if you say, now I'm going to talk about cat's paws, and now I'm going to talk about the ways in which cat's paws are unpleasant, that's a new facet. You move on to a new paragraph. Okay? What does that mean? That means that if you have a very, very long paragraph, and I believe that I have discussed this, but if I haven't, I will clarify. A very, very long paragraph means a single paragraph that is a page or longer, not including quotations. If you have a very, very long paragraph, check and see if it has any of these linking or what I would call transition words in the middle. However, moreover, in addition, that's a phrase, not a word. Also, furthermore, nevertheless, in fact, another phrase, nonetheless, another da 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 da. Okay, if it has these words or any transition word like them, check and see if you should actually be starting a new paragraph. I'm not saying wherever you see these words, start a new paragraph. I'm saying wherever you have an exceptionally long paragraph and you have one of these words or a word like it in the middle, what you may actually have is two paragraphs with a transition word. So if that happens, if you have an exceptionally long paragraph and you have what might be a transition in the middle, start a new paragraph at the transition, reread the page, and see if what you actually had all along was two paragraphs. And that, my friends, is the end of body paragraphs. Except I've noticed that in all the lectures, the bits just kind of trail off, and I'm like, yeah, well, that's it. So this time I decided to end slightly differently with a picture of Storm, who's my favorite X-Man. And I think, therefore, you might be able to spot why I think I look good in this wig. Okay, so here we are. We've discussed all facets of body paragraphs, and what that means is who's got two thumbs and has taught you how to write a successful body paragraph? This gal. But who's got two index fingers and knows how to write a beautiful, successful body paragraph? That's right, you! Okay, I'll catch you on the flip side.